Gute Woche. So Rabbi Shemos began the Farbrengen this afternoon. In general, we brought out the difference between a regular Shabbos and Shabbos Mevorchim. A regular Shabbos gives bracha for the entire week. As the famous quotation, Shabbos minei mizborchin kulhu yoimen. The entire week receives its bracha from Shabbos, the forthcoming week. Shabbos Mevorchim goes further than that. Shabbos Mevorchim gives a bracha into the entire forthcoming month. And there is a takana from the Rabbeim, and especially it was made known and popular by the Frierdiker Rebbe, to utilize Shabbos Mevorchim for a Farbrengen. And as the expression goes, Piska mishamaya nochis. A note came down from Shamayim, a note came down from heaven telling us the greatness of a Hasidische Farbrengen, a Farbrengen that brings to Avas HaTorah and to Avas Reim, in other words, Avas Yisrael, and a Farbrengen where Divrei Torah are discussed, and a Farbrengen which brings to proper results. How great such a Farbrengen is. Memela, that is why on Shabbos Mevorchim we always have such type of a Farbrengen. Particularly when we're talking about this month. This month is the month of Shvat. What is so special about the month of Shvat? Regarding the month of Shvat, we find in the Torah that it was on the 1st of Shvat, the first day in the 11th month, Hoyil Moshe Bayer es HaTorah Hazois. That is when Moshe began translating the Torah into Shivim Loshen, into 70 languages. The Rebbe explained, this was something which was done by Moshe, so that Yidden, wherever they will come, in all countries, and under all circumstances, will be able to have access to Torah. And he added on, it wasn't necessarily done for the fact that Yidden will be coming into Golus later and being amongst Goyim, and that is why we'll be speaking other languages and we will have to have the Torah in other languages. Because even in the days of Moshe, for example, Zvulun, whose Inyan was, he was traveling, he was involved with ships. And Mamela, he would be traveling the waters and would be reaching to other countries. And the Rebbe said he would come into contact with Bnei Noach. And Mamela, he would have to have the dinim of Bnei Noach to relate to them. So he had to have translation of Torah. And the same for many other similar occasions. For example, the Rebbe pointed out that between the Bayis Rishon and the Bayis Sheni, not all the Yidden went back to Eretz Yisrael. So there were some Yidden that after the Bayis Rishon remained in Chutz La'aretz. So they again were speaking different languages, so they again needed the Torah in different languages. So this is the specialty of the month of Shvat, where the month of Shvat has a shaykhas to the fact how the Torah was translated on this month and made accessible in all languages. For us, Hasidim, there is another additional point in the Inyan of Shvat. And that is the Inyan that in the month of Shvat we have Yud Shvat, 10 days in the month of Shvat. The Rebbe expressed himself, Ha'asiri yeh kodesh. The 10th is holy, it's a pasuk. This is the day of the Yortzeit of the Frierdiker Rebbe. So here the Rebbe raises a question. If Shvat is so meaningful, because of the fact that something which was accomplished by Moshe Rabbeinu, that is the day when he began translating the Torah, and this is something which is based on a Chumash, and this is something which is, this date was already set to have a shaykhs to this Inyan thousands of years ago. Here we're talking about an Inyan of Yud Shvat, which happened recently. So, in other words, what type of a comparison is there between, how can we compare these two Inyanim? Obviously, the first Inyan is something which is there for thousands of years, and something which is mentioned in the Torah. And here we're talking about an Inyan which just happened recently. The fact, what happened, that Yud Shvat is the day of the P'tir of the Yom HaYortzeit of the Frierdiker Rebbe. So the Rebbe explained, in davening we say, Elikeinu v'Elikei Aviseinu. That's the regular text how we daven. What does this mean? Shem Yisborach is our God. He's also the God of our fathers, of our ancestors. We realize that Aviseinu were greater than we are. No question about it. So if so, First, we should have stressed the fact that the Rabbeinu Shalom was Elokei Aviseinu, and together with that, he's also Elokeinu. So we see that's not how the text goes. Why? Because first we discuss whatever is closest to us. Whatever is closest to us is also most meaningful to us. So that is why first we say Elokeinu, the Rabbeinu Shalom is our Elokim, he's our God. Together with it, he's also Elokei Aviseinu. Though Aviseinu may have been and were definitely much bigger than we are, much more pious than we are, much greater. But at the same time, we stress what is most closest to us. And the Rebbe explained it with a story that the Rebbe Marash was once sitting and learning. He was learning Gemara. And he was learning the sugyas regarding a shifcha, regarding a maid that got involved with sinning, doing wrong things. And while he's learning this sugya, his father, the Tzemach Tzedek, walks into the room. And they got into a discussion. He points out to his father, look what's going on here. He's learning in the middle of learning a sugya, and differences of opinions of Tanoim. What are the Tanoim debating on? The type of arguments which the Shifcha can give. So he was like trying to prove to his father, isn't it something strange? How could this Shifcha, how can a maid come to such type of thoughts which Tanoim, outstanding sages, one is saying one opinion and one is saying another opinion, so we say that these are the tainas that the Shifcha is going to taina. I mean, she will never in the furthest point ever be able to come to chapsich as such type of tainas. So Tzemach Tzedek explained to the Rebbe Marash that it is not so. Why? Because when an Inyan is negeya, in other words, when one is involved in something and one feels something is close to him, that is when, regardless what he is, could be we're talking about a woman who is a shifcha, how low we may look at the person, it's irrelevant. The fact that person has to save himself and is looking for thoughts and looking for ideas to save herself and for excuses and so forth, she will chapsich on any type of an idea and any type of thought, even on thoughts which Tanoim and Amaroim are debating in the Gemara. What the Rebbe is out to prove in Negeya our Inyan is when an Inyan is close to us, when an Inyan is Negeya us, then it's extremely meaningful. Memela, though on one hand we're talking about Rosh Chodesh Shvat as a day when Moshe Bayer this is the day when Moshe Rabbeinu translated the Torah, made it accessible in all languages. However, at the same time, being that this is the month of Shvat, and to us Hasidim the month of Shvat is close because this is the day that in this month we have the day when the Frierdiker Rebbe passed away. So this is a day that's extremely meaningful, and therefore now, when we are standing in the Shabbos Mevorchim of this month, it is the most appropriate time to accept proper resolutions and proper ideas and thoughts that should be brought down into reality and fulfilled throughout the entire month and carry through for the entire year and come into good ideas and good thoughts as a result of this Farbrengen. As we just mentioned, that this is the whole idea of a Farbrengen. The whole idea of a Chassidish Farbrengen is to lead to good results and good maisim and good achlotes teifus. And everything should be done mitoich simcha, mitoich joy and happiness. The Rebbe continues that it's customary to tie in every inyan with a parsha, with a sedra, especially based on the famous saying of the Alter Rebbe, mit afleben mit der Zeit, we have to live with the times, and this was interpreted that this means the Parshas HaShavua. And this week's parsha is Parsha Shemos. The Rebbe points out that not always is the name of the sedra the first word of the sedra. Sometimes it is the very first word, sometimes it isn't. For example, in our sedra, the sedra begins with V'ela. And we have the V'ela, other sedras also begin with V'ela, V'ela Teildes. And the name of this sedra is Shmais, second word in the sedra. For example, in next week's sedra, the name of next week's sedra is Va'era. Va'era is not even a word of the first pasuk, it's a word in the second pasuk. So the entire sedra is called Shemais because, though there are many inyonim discussed in the sedra, but as explained in Hasidus, on behalf of the Baal Shem Tov, on behalf of the Medrash Tillim, that the inyan of a shame and name is the source of life for a thing. When we're talking about names of Sedres, it is also the same. This is the source of life for this Sedre, and all of the inyanim that are discussed in the Sedre is in the word Shemos. Memela, if we want to find the general inyan of the entire Sedre, it'll be reflected in the name Shemos. What is the contents of this week's Sedre? This week's Sedre primarily deals with the Shibud Mitzrayim. In other words, with the tremendous bondage Yidden were in when they were in Mitzrayim. Actually, it began in Chumash Bereishis. When Yaakov Avinu expressed himself, Yored Yeradnu, we have gone down into Mitzrayim. However, that was the initial steps of the Golus. When did the Golus really become strong? This is what we read about in this week's Sedre. To such an extent that we come to at the end of the Sedre, where we find how Pari made it much harder on the Yidden and told them that they will have to produce the same amount, though that they will not have the bricks anymore, they will have to manufacture everything themselves. So this is the real Kushi Hashibud is discussed in this week's Sedre. As opposed to the next two Sedres, where already we see the opening for Geulah. In Va'ero we see the opening for Geulah, and then boy we have Taka Yitzias Mitzrayim B'Poyel, how the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim.
What's Kushi Hashibud?
The hardship of the Golus in Mitzrayim. Therefore, we have to say that all of this is beremez. We find all this in the title of the Sedre, which is the word Shemos. How do we find all this in Shemos? Shemos means a name. Now here the Rebbe explained how a name, concept of names, has two inyanim. On one hand, it's a maila, as we will see soon. But in general, a name is a helem. As I will explain in a minute. The Rebbe points out that if we were to have a group of people all with the same name, for example, Reuven, says we do not see, it is not easy to notice what is in common between all these people whose name is Reuven. He says, yeah, Ein da Yisayim Shabbos. That is obvious, that their thoughts, their thinking is not the same. Put together any two people, one will say yes, the other one will say no. This, he says, is very obvious. But at the same time, to find something which is equal in all of the Reuvens, it is something which we cannot find. Obvious. He says, after the Farbrengen, the Rebbe says, find a Marbar Avashi. Marbar Avashi is an expression for somebody who's real outstanding, a real genius, a real bright person. And put together into one group, a group of people who all have the same name. And Adarabe, let's see if he can find what is the equality between, what is the Tzad HaShaveh, what do we find equal in all of these people? In other words, it's not an easy task to define people just because they all have the same name. The Rebbe expressed himself, even Yidden, or even Lahavdil, let him take a group of Goyim which all have the same name and also the same idea. What does this show us? This shows us that the inyan of a shame is a helen. In other words, it does not reveal the person. On the contrary, it's a cover-up on him. So if you'll take a few people with the same name, so on one hand they all have the same name, on the other hand it's very hard to discover what is in common between all of these people. That's on one hand. Memela, when we're talking here about the inyan of Shemos, that's why the Sedre is called Shemos, because the entire inyan of the shame is a helem, a cover-up, and this is what Golus is all about. On the other hand, the Rebbe continues to explain the Chassidus, as he added on, that this is something which any young Bachel who begins learning Chassidus is familiar with, that shame has another mila within it, that when one chalishes, a person faints, and we want to awaken the person, how do we awaken him? By whispering his name into his ear. and this will awaken him. This will have a strong impact on awakening him. When we have those people, we come across somebody who is in the spiritually considered fainted, it is our inyan to awaken him. And this applies to any Yid, to anyone, anybody that can only be defined as a Yid. It is our obligation to awaken him and get him out of his fainting spell and see to it that he's introduced to the proper way of observing Torah mitzvahs and so forth. In this Sikha, the Rebbe also explained the entire inyan of Hakdamas Nasel and Nishma, the entire concept of Kabbalah soil. At times that we are doing things that we don't even understand what we are doing. But this is what we are told. We are told in the Torah we have to do it. And the Rebbe explained it with a mashal of a child, of a 5-year-old child. A 5-year-old child who is not feeling well, and he is told that he has to take a medicine. The child does not in any way understand how the medicine functions. But the child being brought up by responsible parents will definitely see to it, the parents will see to it, that the child takes the proper medication. Otherwise his situation will not better, but it will deteriorate, it will become yet worse. The child says, she doesn't know, has no idea how by swallowing this medicine, this is going to help and assist and improve his health situation. In no way, and he can't understand it even. Well, so what do the parents calm the child? The parents calm the child, first take it. And you'll take it, and then you will see how it will change your health and have a good effect on your health and so forth. What do we see from this in the spiritual sense? The same, Benegay, all of us, at times we are told to do things, and we don't understand the meaning of this thing. But our opinion is to do it. And we will do it. Ultimately, we will realize and see how this brings a spiritual cure, a spiritual uplift to us by fulfilling all of these inyan. The latter part of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe spoke one inyan in continuation to last week's Rashi. Last week, the Rebbe explained the Rashi which deals with Yaakov Avinu, that Yaakov Avinu loy meis, that Yaakov Avinu did not die. That's what Chazal tell us, that's quoted in Rashi. And the word Vayomos is not mentioned by Yaakov. So, this is something which is explained by Rashi, and the Rebbe explained it last week, based on the fact that Yaakov did not sin, and the entire union of Misa has a shayches to chait, to sin, as we find right away in the beginning of Chumash Bereishis. Adam was told, and being that Yaakov was at such a high madrege, he was not shayches to the union of Misa. Today the Rebbe went a step further in explaining that union. And he brought out that we find when Yaakov came into Mitzrayim, he confronted Paro. He had a confrontation with Paro, he met Paro. What did he tell Paro? Ma'at v'royim, that he was talking about himself, that the years that he lived, he had a bad life. And what did he tell him? He said that his years did not come close to the years of his parents. In other words, Yaakov, as soon as he came to Mitzrayim, though he lived in Mitzrayim for a remainder of another 17 years, Yaakov lived in Mitzrayim. But right away he told Paroi that he did not live as long as his parents did. Therefore, it means that Yaakov sort of felt that he will be taken away from this world before the time. Because we learned from Rashi already that when a person comes within 5 years of the age that his parents lived, that is when he should expect for himself also, and should begin worrying. That's what Rashi tells us. That we find out by the others that once they came to a point 5 years before their parents passed away from this world, that is when they began worrying and preparing themselves for parting from this world. However, Yaakov said that he lived much less than his father, Yitzchak. And when did he say it? He realized this even 17 years before he was passing away. He already complained on that to Paro. And based on what we find in Chumash Bereishis we find, regarding Chanoich, that the Rebbeinu Shalom took away Chanoich from this world before the time. So Rashi there says that is why the expression of Misa is not used. So what do we see from here? From here we see that when one leaves this world before the time, the expression Misa is not suitable. And that is why, being that Yaakov also left before the time, what's the pshat before the time? Yaakov lived much less than his father. What is the exact expression? Ma'at v'royim hoyu yemei shnei chaya. It's a pasuk in Vayigash. V'loi hisigu, in his years have not reached yemei shnei chaya yavosei b'mei migorei. So Memela, this is an additional interpretation why by the passing of Yaakov, which is at the end of Parshas Vayechi, we do not find the expression Vayamos, because when one leaves this world before his set time, that is when the expression of Misa is not used. This is what while the Rebbe was talking in the Sichos of after the Maimah, the Rebbe was talking about how we have to demand from the Rebbeinu Shalom to send us Mashiach. The Rebbe says, on one hand, it sounds strange. We're telling the Rebbeinu Shalom what to do. The Rebbeinu Shalom is well aware what he has promised us, and is well aware. There's a famous quotation from the Frierdiker Rebbe: "La'alter l'tshuva, la'alter l'gula." Let us have immediate tshuva, and that will bring to the immediate geula. And the entire concept of achishena meaning, Gemara says, there's an expression in Gemara regarding geula. Achishena means to hasten the geula. So the Rebbeinu Shalom is well aware of all that. So, what kind of thing is this that the Rebbe sits? In other words, the Rebbe was referring to himself, sitting in every Farbrengen and demanding from the Rebbeinu Shalom ad Mosai, how much longer are we in Galus, and he should take us out of Galus. Sounds very, very strange. We're telling the Rebbeinu Shalom what to do. And while talking about this concept, the Rebbe says that even those of us who are sitting by the Farbrengen and are sleeping, middle of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe says that when Mashiach will come, they too will be automatically put onto the clouds. You know, there's the expression in the Zohar that Mashiach is going to take us out of Golus with Anana Shamaya, with clouds. The Rebbe says everybody's going to go on the clouds. And those who are sleeping in the middle of the Farbrengens will wake up all of a sudden in Yerushalayim. They will look around themselves, they will see, oh, we are in Yerushalayim. The Rebbe says, so they will have to pour Negelwasser, because they just woke up. And then they will have to recite the proper brachas for finding ourselves in Yerushalayim, in the Beis HaMikdash. So everybody is really going to come out of Golus, even those who are sleeping in the middle of the Farbrengen also. When Mashiach will come, he will really take everyone out of Golus. And again the Rebbe repeated, though, to use the expression, who is a Yachem Adam? A Yachem Adam is an expression meaning like a somebody. A somebody that we're sitting here and demanding from the Rebbeinu Shalom to take us out of Golus. But at the same time, this is taka what we want. We want the Rebbeinu Shalom should put an end to the Golus and take us all out of Golus. And the prophets already enough ad Mosai. How much longer will we be in Golus? Like while talking about this, Rebbe stopped right in the middle and took the becher into his hand and he said L'chaim, L'chaim, L'vracha, and with a broad smile on his face, moved his hand across in a very ukuleked way. Throughout the Farbrengen again today, the Rebbe was demanding and reminding us what he's been talking about recently, how important Simcha is, and that Simcha is Peiretz Geder. With joy, with Simcha, it opens all boundaries and all walls, all barricades are broken with the power of Simcha. It was later in the Farbrengen that the Rebbe reminded again that we have to utilize these days for extra Simcha and extra tzedakah. And both of these things have a power of tremendous achievements, tremendous accomplishments. Tzedakah, Ein Yisrael Nigol and Ela B'Tzedakah. Tzedakah leads to Geula. And Simcha also has this tremendous power within it, that it brings about Simcha, Peiretz Geder. It opens all types of limitations. Memelas, This is what the Rebbe has been demanding from us recently at many, many Farbrengens, and today again reiterated the importance of it, that it's tremendous inyan of being besimcha, serving the Rebishter through simcha. Rebbe spoke another inyan. We tied together two inyanim that have a shaykhs to two dates. One is the date of Chav Tevis, 20 days in the month of Tevis, which was this past Wednesday. The Rebbe says Wednesday already has a shaykhs to Shabbos, because Wednesday in the Shir Shel Yoim we already recite the small Lechuna Ranana, which Chav Tevis is the Yortzeit of the Rambam. Tonight is Chav Dalet Tevis, which is the Yortzeit of the Alter Rebbe, the Balatani. In fact, this year, the Kviyas of the Yortzeit is the same as in the year when the Alter Rebbe passed away. The Alter Rebbe passed away on a Motzei Shabbos, Motzei Shabbos Chav Dalet Tevis. Here the Rebbe raised the question that there's writings from the Tzemach Tzedek, where the Tzemach Tzedek refers to the passing of his Zayda, the Alter Rebbe. And there he writes that the Alter Rebbe passed away on Motzei Shabbos Kodesh, Parshas Motzei Shabbos Kodesh Parshas Shemos, Chav Dalet Tevis, in a village in Piena. That is where the Alter Rebbe was running away with his entire family from Napoleon, and they were in a small village called Piena, and that is where the Alter Rebbe passed away. Rebbe says actually tonight can be looked upon as Parshas Shemos, as Motzei Shabbos of Shemos. It could also be looked upon as like tonight is already Shaykhs to Sunday, so tonight is already Parshas Ve'era. So we see that when the Tzemach Tzedek wanted to refer to the passing of the Alter Rebbe, he refers to it as Motzei Shabbos Parshas Shemos. Now there's a Gemara. Gemara tells us if one passes away on Friday, Simin Toivloi, Simin Yofeloi, the Gemara uses the expression. It's a nice simin. It's a simin of it's nice. In other words, it's kind of a schus. Then the Gemara says if one passes away on Motzei Shabbos, simin raloi. It's something which is undesirable. Nonetheless, we see that when the Tzemach Tzedek writes to describe about the Ptira of his Zayda, he writes, when did he pass away on Motzei Shabbos? He could have written that his Zayda passed away early Yom Rishon, the evening to Sunday. And Yom Rishon, the Rebbe says, to find something great about Yom Rishon is very easy. Rishon symbolizes one, and one reflects Achdus. So when the Tzemach Tzedek wanted to stress when his Zayda, the Alter Rebbe, passed away, he could have written early Yom Rishon. And so why should he mention Motzei Shabbos when the Tzemach Tzedek was well aware of the Gemara says that if one passes by Motzei Shabbos, Siman Ralo. So here the Rebbe explained that the Tzemach Tzedek wanted to be at Mekasher with the Indian of Shemos. Shemos, the Shemos, names. Kol HaTorah Shemos of Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's a Chazal. Chazal tell us that every word of Torah is a name of the Rebishter. And here the Tzemach Tzedek's intention was to tie in the Alter Rebbe with the Indian of Shemos. And as the Rebbe explained, that by that we're talking this year what the Kviyas of Chav Tevis. In other words, the Rambam's Yortzeit is also in Parshas Shemos, and the Alter Rebbe, we say, is Motzei Shabbos Parshas Shemos. So we're talking about two inyanim in Shemos. What is the difference between the Alter Rebbe and the Rambam? Now, at previous occasions, the Rebbe has spoken and explained many inyanim that are common between the Alter Rebbe and the Rambam. Today the Rebbe is explaining what is the major difference between the Alter Rebbe and the Rambam. The Rebbe is explaining that the Rambam's main sefer is the Mishnah Torah, and the Mishnah Torah is halachas. In other words, the Rambam's inyan is nigla the Torah. What is the Alter Rebbe's inyan? The Alter Rebbe's inyan is Pnimiyus HaTorah. Why? Because the Alter Rebbe wrote a Shulchan Aruch. But as the children of the Alter Rebbe write in their preface, in their Hakdama to the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, they write that one of the main accomplishments of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch is that the Alter Rebbe gives reasons for the halacha. The Alter Rebbe gives the tam. What is the tam? Tam, a reason. A reason is the pnimius, the in-depth of the halacha. And this is what the Alter Rebbe excelled in. So talking in Hasidic terminology, there is Alma de Iskasya and Alma de Isgalya. There is the covered inyanim, covered world, and there's the revealed world, which lets itself fits into different expressions of Nigla and Pnimius. When we're talking here about the Alter Rebbe and the Rambam, it is the Alter Rebbe who took Pnimius and put it into Nigla. Because he took the timing, which this is the Pnimius of the Halacha, and put it in, and entered it where? Into the Shulchan Aruch. By the Rambam we find, the Rambam B'chlal talks halachas, he doesn't give timing. But in the first prokim of the Rambam in Hilchos Deis, that is where he tells us about the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that everything was created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So even in that perik of the Rambam referring to the Eibishter does not spell out the Eibishter's name. He puts Yisoid HaYisoidos Va'amud HaMetziyos. These are the opening words of the Rambam. So the Rambam's grandson, Reb David, writes that his Zayda, the Rambam, was referring with these words to the shame of the Rebishter, to Hashem's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, because these are the opening words of the Rambam. Yisoid HaYisoidos Ve'amud HaChochmois composed the beginning of these words as Roshei Tevis Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is Hashem's name. So what was the Rambam's attitude in his Sefer? To take Pnimius and to take the Pnimius, in other words, and that should be hidden. In other words, even the Inyanim that have where he's talking directly about the Eibishter, he put it also in a hidden way. So the Rambam's Inyan is Nigla the Torah, as opposed all Inyanim Begalye, as opposed to the Alter Rebbe who took the Pnimius and put it into a Nigla. The Rambam took the Nigla and put it into a Remez even, where we're dealing about the Eibishter. Comes Parsha Shemos, is Shemos Loshen Rabim. Here we are tying together both of these tremendous personalities, the Alter Rebbe and the Rambam. In the Rashi of this week's Sedra, Rabbi explained, as customary in every Farbrengen, to explain a Rashi. He says there's a inyan in the beginning of the Sedra which requires explanation, and it's very obvious. Torah is telling us about Shifra and Pua. Shema Miyaldei Sa'ivri. What were their names? Shema Acha Shifra, and the other one was Pua. Who is Shifra and Pua? So Rashi tells us, you know who Shifra and Pua are? That's Yocheved and Miriam. So the Rebbe asks a very simple question. Why does Rashi have to get involved and tell us that Shifra and Pua are Yocheved and Miriam? Let's learn Shifra and Pua, that there was somebody by the name of Shifra and somebody by the name of Pua. And as far as Pshuta Shel Micha, what does that bother us if we learn it that way? So Mefarshim, the commentaries on Chumash say that what forces Rashi to learn Pshat, that Shifra and Pua means Yocheved and Miriam, because we learn weiter. After Sheni we learn Vayhi ki yoru ha-miyaldos es Elokim, when the Rebishter realized that these miyaldos, these midwives, were God-fearing, Vayas lahem botim, so the Rebishter rewarded them with making houses to them. In Kapitel Aleph, Pasuk Chav Aleph, so Rashi comments what is meant by botim, what kind of houses did the Rebishter make for them? So Rashi tells us houses of Kehuna, Leviah, and Malchus. So being that these women were rewarded with Kahuna, Leviah, and Malchus, which is a tremendous reward from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So who are these women? So we have no alternative, but these women are Yocheved and Miriam. Because in other words, whom do we know that was rewarded with Kahuna, Leviah, and Malchus? That's Yocheved and Miriam. So that is why when we're learning in the Pasuk, Shifra and Pua, we have to say that this means Yocheved and Miriam. The Rebbe says, Why get involved in teaching vayas lehem batim, that the Rebbe made houses, meaning bati kahuna, bati levi, and bati malchus. And this should force us to teach that Yocheved and Miriam are meant by Shifra and Pua. Let's learn vayas lehem batim. Very simple, that the Rebbe help, that they, like every Jewish woman, builds a house when she gets married. Because if we look into the Rashi carefully, in the Rashi of vayas lehem batim, Rashi says, "But kahuna levia malchus shekruyim batim." Where do we find that kahuna levia malchus is called batim? So Rashi has to come on to a raya from the pasuk in Tanakh, "Vayiven as beis Hashem v'es beis Hamelech." And this is not sufficient. The Rashi over there has to conclude with another word. If this is not enough for you, you want to know full interpretation of this Chazal, go take a Gemara Saita and cook noch, and there you will have a full explanation to be able to understand how Bati means Bati Kahuna, Bati Levi, and Bati Malchus. Don't tell me about the Gemara and Saita. Don't tell me about a pasuk in Nach. And furthermore, the Rebbe stressed, Rashi does not even use the word K'moshe Doshu Razal B'Mesechta Saita, which this would mean that it's a drash. Rashi strictly sticks to it that this is the pshat of the word Batim. Why get involved in all this? Let us learn Batim, very simple. Let us learn that Batim means a reward that they put up their own homes. They were married and they put up houses. And not get involved in Bati Kahuna, Levi, and Malchus. And Memela, we will not get involved in being forced to teach that Shifra and Pua also means Yocheved and Miriam. We will learn Glatik, that Shifra and Pua, the names of two women. And then the Rebbe rewarded these two women, Vayas Lahem Batim. In order to understand this inyan, the Rebbe says there's another very, very strong kasha here. We're learning the psukim, the child who's learning Chumash. So, he's learning, and he reads that the Vnei Yisrael, Paru, Vayishretzu, Vayarbu, Vayatzmu, B'meod meod, the Yidden were multiplying in a very strong way. In such a strong way, that Rashi comments, that they were giving birth to 6 children at one time. Shisha bekeres echad. Where's the Rashi? So the question arises, Yidden were multiplying in such large numbers. What do we learn in Chumash? We learn in Chumash that there were 2 midwives. Who are the 2 midwives? Shifra and Pua. And especially that now that we know that Pua means Miriam, Miriam was a youngster here. If we're talking here before Moshe was born, what was the difference of age between Miriam and Moshe? It was a few years. So how much old, what age could have Miriam been here? She was a little child. She was a little child assisting her mother. So we say that these 2 women, Yocheved and Miriam, they were capable of helping all the women who had to give birth in those days in Mitzrayim. Who was around? It was a staff of 2 people. Very strange. It was such extraordinary circumstances that 6 children were being born at one time. And here we say that Yocheved and Miriam, they were the staff, they handled everything. This is a very strong kasha. But if we look through the psukim in the Chumash, we find the answer right away. Because when Pari called the Jewish midwives and asked them why are they not listening to his decree, what did they respond? What did they say? The Yiddish women, especially we're talking about the women that were in Mitzrayim, they were all Nashim Tzidkoniyas, as Chazal tell us. So what did they say? They are such capable women, they are so lively that even before the midwife comes, they manage. So what do we see from here? That the Taka didn't need anybody. The Rebbe says, we have to learn that Shifra and Pua, or Yocheved and Miriam, any way you want to say, that whatever they told Pari was true. Because they're not going to tell Pari something which has no truth. Because the famous expression in Gemara, Milse Davida Ligluye Lemishakre Inshe, something which will ultimately be revealed, you cannot lie on. So if the case wouldn't be this way, that the Jewish woman really worked her way around himself, then they would never say that to Pari. Because Pari and the Mitzrim were well aware what was going on by the Eden. As we find later, they kept track of every Jewish woman who was pregnant. And then when it came to Yocheved, that Yocheved was no longer able to hide her child, Moshe, she had a problem and she had to go ahead and hide him. Put him at the Yamsuf. So Memela, we must say that this interpretation, which was given by the Miyaldis HaIvriyos to Paroi, is true. That the women then were capable of handling themselves. And that is why there was no need for having a crew, for having a staff of people handling it. However, there were two exceptional tzedekis, and that was Yocheved and Miriam. Because the Rebbe expressed himself here, we're talking about Yocheved, who was a 130-year-old woman at this time. So Yocheved, as a 130-year-old woman, was not the pshat that she and Miriam were the only midwives which were going around helping all the Yiddish women. The Yiddish women were not in need of them. The only thing, should a woman, if it ever happened that a woman was afraid and she did request some sort of extra help, that is when Yocheved and Miriam would come around. And that is why Rashi tells us exactly what Yocheved did and what Miriam did, and that is why they were called Shifra and Pua. It would be like to give an extra touch to the child when a mother ever required it. Now we come to the pasuk here. The pasuk says, "Vayas lahem batim." HaKadosh Baruch Hu rewarded these miyaldei seivriyas by making batim, by making houses to them. So Rashi is explaining what batim means, telling us it does not mean ordinary houses. It means batei kahuna, batei leviyah, and batei malchus. So Rashi should have only quoted the word batim. Batim, this is what he's explaining. Why does Rashi also quote the word vayas lahem? He made them. What Rashi actually is interpreting is the word batim, bais, batim. This is what Rashi should have quoted, and not anymore. So Rebbe is learning. If the pshat in vayas lahem batim would mean, if we were able to learn that vayas lahem batim should mean very simple, as the Rebbe spoke in the question, that it means that the Rebbe rewarded them with the fact that they got married and they built their own homes, which every house, B'Yisrael, is called a bais. Then the pasuk should have used the expression vayehi lahem batim, and they had their own house. Vayas means HaKadosh Baruch Hu created something, He made something, and that is why Rashi quotes these two words also. HaKadosh Baruch Hu made something new. The fact of when a husband and wife get married and a house is started, this is not a new asiyah. Here we're talking HaKadosh Baruch Hu as a reward to these miyaldei seivriyos went ahead and yas lahem batim. He made something new, specially designed for them, to reward them how they acted to Him at such a crucial time, and they didn't listen to the decree of Paroi, and they sacrificed themselves and helped out the Jewish women that needed their help. So how could we teach here that it means different? It means a regular house. We have to teach that it means batei kahuna, batei leviyah, and batei malchus. We are forced in pshuta shel mikra that we cannot learn that this means a regular house, that they built their own houses, their own households. We cannot learn that. We have to learn that it means vayas lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu has made something special for them. What did He reward them with? Batei kahuna, batei leviyah, and batei malchus. Memela, if we have to learn here that it means batei kahuna, batei leviyah, and batei malchus, so this already forces us back that who was rewarded with the kahuna, leviyah, and malchus? That was Miriam and Yocheved. And Memela, when the pasuk tells us shifra and pua, who is it meant by shifra and pua? We refer to Miriam and Yocheved. In the Farbrengens, that the Rebbe also refers to Rambam, Shia Rambam. And the Shia Rambam of today, as the Rambam is divided for 3 prokim a day, it is the halachas of shchenim, the halachas of neighbors. The first 3 prokim in Hilchas Shchenim. Rebbe brought out several inyonim in this Rambam. Rebbe Rabbi brought out, we have an expression in halacha, there's an expression of kol da'alim gvar. At times, the halacha is that whoever is stronger, kol da'alim, whoever is stronger gvar can grab. In other words, when there's a dispute between two people, in particular cases, the halacha tells us that it's kol da'alim gvar. Rabbi pointed out that the Rambam does not use this expression, which is the expression in Gemara. The Rambam uses kind of like a finer expression. This is a type of expression, whoever is stronger grabs. It's not suitable for halacha to use such type of an expression. So the Rambam uses a different expression. I'm looking for the expression in the Rambam now. Okay, I'm not gonna. Anybody could look it up if they wish. Also, what the Rebbe did was he explained this whole inyan of Hilchos Shchenim in Ruchnius, as he does at many occasions, and he explained that there's an inyan of a neighbor and there's an inyan of a shutef, an inyan of a partner. These are the halachas actually which are discussed here. Rebbe explained that by every yid it's also the same. We have, as we are, neighbors. Who is our neighbor? The Rebbeinu Shalom is our neighbor. There's a famous pasuk, Toiv shochin karev ma'ach rochik. Better a good neighbor than a far brother. So Mela, Rebbeinu Shalom, he's our neighbor. However, it comes times when we get closer to him than a neighbor, than the concept of neighbors, and that is when we come into the idea of partners, of a shutef. For example, Shabbos. Mara tells us that Shabbos, a Yid is considered a partner with the Rebbeinu Shalom. Rebbe explained that in halacha, they refer to it at many occasions, the concept of partnership does not mean that half belongs to one and half belongs to another. The concept of a partner is that in every drop they are partners. In other words, every little bit of whatever they are partners in is owned by both of them. It's not the pshat we make this side of the field, when the field is owned by two partners. So we will say that Reuven owns the right-hand side of the field and Shimon owns the left side of the field. Or a house, he owns the first two floors, and the other one owns the other two floors if it's a four-story house. This is not so. The pshat in Shutvis is, this is how the Rebbe learns in the halachish explanation of Shutvis. He spoke about it at many occasions. Means that in every bit which is owned together, they are both a shutfama, is owned by both of them equally. Memela, this stresses more how Yidden are shutfim with the Rebishter. And in general, we find the Gemara tells us that Shloisha shutfim yesh ba'adam, there are three partners in a person: father, mother, and the Rebbeinu Shalom. So again, we have the concept of the Rebbeinu Shalom being our neighbor, our shachin, but there is a yet higher madrege, and that is the madrege of the Rebbeinu Shalom being our partner. This is a deeper association with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the level of a partner. And that is when the Rebbe says, when we are associated with the Eibishter in the format of a partner, this is when we can already... Again, the Rambam is not using the expression of kol da'alim gvar, whoever stronger grabs, but the idea does apply. In other words, when we are associated with the Rebishter as a shutef, that is when we can come bizroya. Zroya is also an expression of power, and demand from the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Rebbeinu Shalom should reward Yidden as it should be, as it's befitting for Yidden. Here the Rebbe referred to a quotation from the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe said that every Yid is a Bena Ram Yitzchak v'Yankov. Every Yid is considered like a Ben Melech, like a prince. And therefore, when one hires a Ben Melech, he has to make sure that he treats him properly. There are halachas in Shulchan Aruch how one is supposed to treat his employees. So we can imagine that when one has as an employee a Ben Melech, a prince, then he has to see to it that he treats him as it's suitable to treat a prince, which is a sudish shleima b'shaitoi. Make sure that the meal that he gives him is like the meal of Shleima Melech at its proper time. In other words, everything to to its perfection and treat him properly. Remember what the Rebbe said? The Rebbeinu Shalom also has to treat Yidden properly. He again came back talking on these lines. Rebbe said, in this week's Sedres, we come across the concept of Avodas Perach. Avodas Perach means hard labor. That's how we simply teach it. Rebbe says, well, if we look into the real interpretation of Avodas Perach, we will find that it doesn't mean necessarily hard toil, hard labor. It means, what Paro did was, he gave the job of men to women, and the job of women to men. When one does something which he's not used to, that's considered Avodas Perach. It mustn't necessarily be hard. For another person, it may be a very easy type of work. But when this is given to one who is not used to it, it's considered a hard job for him, a hard task. The Rebbe said every Yid is by the Eibishter, use an expression in Yiddish, like an Edem of Kest. An Edem of Kest, it's a Yiddish expression, meaning when one takes a son-in-law, and the son-in-law's Indian is to sit and learn, and he's supported by his in-laws or by his parents. So we can imagine that an Edom of Kest usually does not do any hard work, does not do any work at all. His Indian is to sit and learn. An Edom of Kest, any little thing which he will have to do will be considered a whole big job for him. And Kleinigkeit, he'll be burdened. It's a tremendous burden. He's not used to make his hands wet, like the expression goes. Same the Rebbe says that it's time that the Rebbeinu Shalom should treat every Yid that way, to see to it that every Yid should not be overburdened, and every Yid should have all his needs to the fullest extent, in a way of harchava, as being taka that every Yid is a ben melech, every Yid is a prince, a ben Avraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov, and that is why Yidden should have all their needs to the fullest extent without having to go out of their way in any extra way and having to work hard for it. But it's the obligation of the Rebbeinu Shalom to see to it that Yidden have all their needs. Miyodai hamleya hapsucha hakdoisha v'arachava.